All right, so we're recording.
I'm gonna pull my seat up so it's a little taller.
All right, so we are live. So hello everyone. I want to welcome everybody to the second webinar that we are hosting with the Early Career Working Group in the National Association of Plant Breeders. My name is Dan Packer. I'm a research associate here at Washington State University and the committee chair for the Early Career Working Group. And with me hosting is Nikayla Strauss. Nikayla, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a third-year PhD student here at Washington State University, and I'm working with Aaron Carter and Kim Campbell on wheat breeding and specifically synthetic wheat. And I got my bachelor's degree at Colorado State University with Scott Haley, also working on wheat breeding.
Fantastic. We have two panelists here today. We have Dr. Aaron Carter and Dr. Kevin Murphy. Dr. Aaron Carter is the O.A. Vogel Endowed Chair of Wheat Breeding and Genetics here at Washington State University, with an emphasis on, I'm assuming, winter wheat breeding. And Dr. Kevin Murphy, who is also an Associate Professor here at Washington State University, and he leads the Sustainable Seed Systems Lab with an emphasis in specialty crop breeding, barley breeding, and international cropping systems. So welcome to you both, and welcome to all our attendees. So the purpose of this webinar is that we received questions submitted by members of the Early Career Working Group and also the Graduate Student Working Group about plant breeding careers and also about the future of plant breeding. And we have been posing these questions to people in the private sector, academic breeders, people in the extension, and also people in other fields associated with plant breeding. And so today we'll be posing these questions to our two panelists, and we'll start off right up with the first question that was submitted. So I'm going to read it verbatim, and then we'll get into the discussion about the premise of this question and what y'all think about this. But the question asks, in an environment where there are more plant breeders than positions, how can students make themselves more marketable, especially considering the gap between academic training and commercial needs, as well as the ongoing mergers within private industry? Please respond with respect to PhD students and also postdoctoral researchers as well. What do y'all think of this question?
Well, I think the first thing to say is, I think Kevin or Dr. Murphy would agree, right? These are just our views and kind of thoughts on what's going on, you know, and I think the question about, you know, more plant breeders than positions, you know, that struck me a little bit because I've been able to, I mean, most of the students that I've seen coming out of plant breeding have been able to get careers, you know, so you know, the context behind these are hard to know sometimes, but I know there are a lot of plant breeding positions out there, maybe not in the state you want to live in or the country you want to live in, but there are definitely a lot of opportunities. I feel, you know, out there, you may have to go, you know, some distance to get those positions, but you know, they are there. But that's just kind of my opinion from what I've seen. But besides the point, you know, getting to the point about making themselves more marketable. So the one thing that I've seen, you know, and most people listening know this about plant breeding is, you know, plant breeding really well, but plant breeding extends to multiple other disciplines. And so as you can gain knowledge about other disciplines, that definitely makes you more marketable. So, you know, if you have your plant breeding theory, but you can get more information on your expertise in, you know, genetics or quantitative genetics or statistical genomics or statistics or, you know, pathology, agronomy, you know, whatever discipline that is there that supports the entire plant breeding effort, I see that as somebody who's going to be more marketable than just kind of focusing in solely on kind of the plant breeding discipline.
Yeah, I agree. And beyond that, though, also just to diversify your skill set, right? So instead of just being in the lab and learning these different disciplines, in addition, write grants, work with all your other students in the lab and in the department, learn what they're doing, learn how to drive a combine. I know a professor who didn't hire a postdoc because that postdoc didn't know how to use farm equipment. So just get out there, even if you have struggled driving a car, ask to asked to drive a combine, learn how to drive a tractor, get out there, set up the plots, just do as much as you can in as many different fields so you're at least familiar with all of that. And that way you'll feel better about starting up a breeding program. You'll know it from step one to the end. And the end part too, I think, is really important. So take your time. If you're working with wheat or barley like we do, talk to as many farmers as you can, get to know the bakers and the millers and the maltsters and the brewers and the processors, all the end users, so you really know why you're doing what you're doing. And I think a lot of times people get stuck in the lab and maybe they know what their plant looks like, their crop looks like, and a little bit about how it does in the field, but really just understanding the whole value chain essentially of what you're doing. I think when I look at somebody, that would stand out to me as being important.
Yeah, the other thing that I do a lot of evaluation on are sometimes not the technical skills, how to drive a combine. I mean, it's important, but I also look at that as I could probably teach someone how to drive a combine too. So I look a lot also for those skills I can't teach: good communication, good writing, critical thinking skills. If somebody comes in and can demonstrate to me that they have a lot of those skills, good, like I say, communication, interpersonal collaboration, critical thinking, I'll sometimes take a chance on them and say, hey, this is a smart person. I think they can manage other aspects of what we're doing. I can teach them some of these other skills maybe, but I'm hiring. Their value to me is their critical thinking skill. So it's, there's kind of two parts to that as well, I think sometimes. And, if when you're looking at jobs too, I think your employers are going to see that, because your background is not always going to be in the crop that you're interviewing for, or in a cropping system or breeding system. But if you can demonstrate that you're intelligent, you've got good communication, good critical thinking, and you do have some background knowledge and technical skills to back that up, you're definitely going to be more marketable.
Okay.
That's really interesting. So what do you think about, you just touched on the fact that you can apply for positions that maybe are different than the background that you have. But how often do you see graduate students getting jobs in the same, I guess, subsection of breeding that they did their PhD in? Like if someone focuses on quantitative genetics, do you see them usually going towards quantitative genetics as a career? How easy do you think it is to get a PhD in something and then try and maybe get a job in something a little bit different?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, Nikayla, because everybody has different areas they want to go into, right? And so I don't think anything would stop you from applying for any job. If you've got a background in quantitative genetics but want to apply for a plant breeding position, that's fine. Or conversely, if you're more trained in plant breeding and want to apply for more quantitative genetics, again, if you have that background and skill set, I think you'll be successful. It really, I think, just depends on the person and their interests. I have students that come in that, sit down and say, I want to do statistical genomics, and that part of plant breeding. They don't want to be the person in the field, walking the field, making the selections. They want to be that support of doing that quantitative genetics or statistical genomics part. And they're successful at doing that. And I think that's the hard thing about plant breeding is there's so many components of plant breeding.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely the boots on the ground, getting dirty, walking fields, making selections. But, and that's basically what I do a lot of. But that doesn't downplay the collaborations I have with my statistical genomicist and the help I need in that area to get something like genomic selection and genomic predictions going in my program. So, it's all plant breeding, just all in a different realm.
Yeah, I agree. And the only thing to add is don't be afraid of applying for new and interesting crop positions, or even outside your field of quantitative genetics or plant breeding. I see that quite a bit.
Yeah.
People doing something very different than what they thought they wanted to do, or they ended up doing. And so, yeah, I've seen people change crops very successfully, and it works well. But even within that, just going from one major focus to another, and I think a lot of the training that we can give is what Aaron said, critical thinking and that type of work, where you do have that capacity to change, and that's important for a plant breeder anyway. Just to be able to be flexible with your research and your crops or whatever it is, just be able to have that flexibility and capacity to think and change, because likelihood you're not going to be doing the same thing for 50 years.
Right.
Aaron, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. At the webinar that we had 2 weeks ago, where we had some private sector scientists, 2 of them, of the 3, went back and got business certificates.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really valuable for them
Yeah.
in the roles that they had.
Yeah.
So this was after they had graduated. Well, I can't remember. It was either during their grad school program or after they graduated, they went back and got business and leadership certificates, because for them, it was something that they had to have in their toolkit.
Okay.
But before we continue the next question, I want to tell the people who are attending via the web that there is a Q&A dialog box at the bottom of your screen, and we will be doing a Q&A session, and we'll try to get as many questions in as we can from that.
All right, so we can move on to the second question, which, just reading it, is failure is inevitable for everyone in some aspect or another at some point in time. What are some of the most common reasons people don't do well in a job interview from what you've seen?
Oh, I mean, I think oh man, that's kind of hard.
Do you interview a lot of people?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we interview a lot of people at various levels, right? I mean, I interview grad students and postdocs that are applying to my program. I interview undergrads who are trying to get just hourly jobs. And then we're on search committees for other faculty, chair searches, whatever it is. I think one of the biggest ways people maybe don't, all right, so I couldn't say that one of the biggest. One, I mean, you have to go in with a little bit of confidence, right? And that shows through in the interview. And so people who come in that don't demonstrate confidence, I think, that shows through, and it definitely weakens their chances. Part of that is taking some time to learn a little bit about the crop that you're interviewing for, the position you're interviewing for, the company you're interviewing for. Is very important, because it shows you've done your homework as well. You just haven't applied and then you come in and you're like, so what does your company do exactly? Right? That's not a good thing to do. A little research about the people you're going to be meeting with. It always impresses me when I sit down with a search candidate and they're like, oh yeah, so, I saw, I read over a few of your papers, your paper titles. I noticed you did some work in high throughput phenotyping. Can you tell me a little more about that? It shows me they're engaging, they've thought through it, they've taken their time to do some homework, they know, a little bit about my background, and have been able to enter into some good dialogue with that. And then just the basic professional skills. Nothing's the biggest turnoff is when a undergraduate walks into the office and we start talking about a position, and they're obviously more interested in whatever's going on their phone instead of our conversation, right?
Yeah.
Put your phone away. Just things like that. Even like at dinners, you'll go out for dinners, and if you're always sitting there checking your phone, sometimes it's inevitable, and I just give people the professional courtesy. I was on a business trip once where I had a major family issue going on at the same time, and I needed to be available. And so when I sat down at that dinner, I just upfront said, I have to apologize right now. This is going on in my life, and if this message comes through, would it be all right if I stepped out and take the phone call?
Yeah.
And it just upfront shows, a little courtesy. if that does have to happen, right? You try and put it away, but this was a situation that I had to be available, even though I was out of town. So, but yeah, that's usually why I see, and I wouldn't say fail, but those are a little more turnoffs to me, right? Of when people come in and they're kind of doing some of those things, haven't done their homework, aren't really professional or courteous and stuff like that. It's just like, you've gone from maybe my top choice on paper to now somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Oh, I agree though. Okay, so you said it perfectly. The only thing I would add though is that remember that you're also interviewing them.
Yeah.
So you got to make sure you're going to be a good fit there. Are they the folks you want to end up working for? So really asking them some good questions. And again, showing you've done the research, that's critical. That's
So
really
have your own
important.
litany of questions prepared.
Yeah, and just have to have that confidence. Speak to your strengths, and
I'm a great candidate.
Yeah, and if I choose to come work for you, you don't have to be arrogant in that way, but just keep it, just in the back of your mind that you're also interviewing them.
Can you give a couple examples of good questions to ask your interviewer?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they're good, but no, I would really ask them what the workplace environment is. How do things work in your department? If you're coming into the Department of Crop and Soils, you might ask how well do the crop scientists work with the soil scientists? Just things like that show that you're interested in the position. But whatever your interests are, that's what you need to ask about, I think. I mean, you need to look critically at the position and think is that what I want? So
what would you say about where's the line of getting too invasive with your questioning?
Yeah. So, I mean, getting into a lot of the nitty-gritty details, I mean, you usually aren't asking about salary, you usually aren't asking about, some of those deeper benefit type questions until you've got the job offer. Right. And then it's perfectly acceptable to ask more about, health insurance options and, things like that. But yeah, I think a lot of it goes more, like Kevin said, about the fit of that, company, that department, wherever it is, so what are opportunities for professional growth? If you're going to a private company or maybe like USDA, but you're interested in teaching, you can talk a little bit about that. Like, okay, I'm interviewing for a private company, but are there opportunities for community engagement as well? And so you got to think of kind of like what your values are, and what your interests are, and then seeing, can I fit into that? So if you really enjoyed that community engagement and sat down and a company was like, no, we really don't, we'd prefer you just be in the lab working. Well, obviously that might not be the best fit for you. But kind of asking that up front. So kind of knowing like, what is it that you value as a person? What are your interests? And is that position going to allow you some of those freedoms, right?
That's good, thank you.
So moving on to the next question. This one's a little bit more personal. But what was the one thing you wish you were better prepared for when starting your first position after graduate school?
Yeah. I know that one. For me, it's preparation in understanding how budgets work. And that I thought I had a lot of training in other things, but that was the biggest one. The one I was most excited I did have experience was grant writing, because that allows you to hit the ground running. And so if you're a grad student or a postdoc, I would highly recommend you learn and practice grant writing, because it is a skill and you get better at it. So better to try it and fail as a grad student and at least have that practice.
Yeah.
But then once you do have your own program, our former associate dean of research told us a few years ago, it's like you're an independent contractor, right? You're the one in charge for doing making your program successful, and you need to figure out how to do that. And for me, the steepest learning curve was figuring out how budgets work, and I didn't have any experience with that as a grad student or a postdoc. So that,
you think like maybe like an accounting class at some point in your education would have helped, or is it totally like a one-off system?
Or do you mean learning how budgets in a university work and how the system works?
Speaking from how the system works and how it works in terms of grants and what it really takes to get a graduate student funded, and just all the indirect costs, all the things that you do have to consider when you're writing a budget, but also just managing it, how to manage subcontracts properly, that type of thing.
Yeah, that is hard to get experience
with
as a graduate student.
Yeah. Maybe asking advisors is the best way to do it, or sitting down.
Asking to sort of be involved
to help
in the process.
Get peek behind the curtains.
Yeah.
It definitely is difficult to get that experience. I viewed it maybe a little different. I figured I was going to be forced to learn, and there were probably going to be a lot of budget people in the university that could help me do that. So it's kind of one of those things where sometimes you could never be prepared for some of these situations, and you're just going to have to learn it on the job. And so although I may not have been fully understanding of how budgets worked, I figured, that's something I can learn. So when I thought about this question, I went more maybe back to like the technical aspect. So I was thinking, like, for me, statistics was probably an area where I could have come in with a lot more strength, because one, super important. I don't think you can ever be good enough at statistics, but two, it's something that's not as easy to learn on the job. Learning about budgets is good, but actually being able to understand and dive into a new statistical technique. I mean, most of us rely on the techniques we used in grad school, right? I used SAS in grad school. To learn R, I have to dedicate a lot of time to learn a completely new system now, where it's super easy for me just to go back to old SAS code and pull it up and do what I've always done. And so getting some of those tools in the toolbox that you're familiar with, when I was thinking about it, were a little more important for me.
So learning things in graduate school or before your career that you won't have time to devote to learning later.
Yeah, potentially. I still had to devote time to learn about budgets, but in my mind, if I had to weigh the two of what I wanted to do in grad school, I definitely would take a more statistical classes than maybe taking a accounting or budgeting class. But again, that's my view and my background, which obviously is different than Kevin's. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but
no, maybe I just had more painful memories of early budget experiences, but
definitely. It's hard.
It's something you don't think about though, really. Like I know you take stats and you have to think about it, and you can never take or know stats well enough. But budgets is really what caught me off guard, I guess.
Yeah, and there are some things like that again, I don't think you could ever be prepared for. So I've been in my position for close to 10 years now. And we've had 2 people in the program pass away. And so that's something, again, that like, how would you ever deal, something like how do you sit down with your lab group and say, a technician's passed away or a grad student's passed away, and, just dealing with that as a supervisor, it's just some of those skills that you find the resources in the moment, which is what I had to do. I had to step back and say, okay, who can I lean on and figure out how do I deal with this before I walked into my lab group. There's going to be skills like that again, grad school can just never prepare you for. Any kind of training probably could ever prepare you for. It's just, sometimes things happen on the job and you adjust to them in the moment.
Yeah. I've always thought it'd be difficult to go from the transition from grad student to managing a staff.
Mhm.
and a staff that may likely have quite a bit more experience in that program than you have, and have their manner of doing things, and, and you're the new guy, you're the new woman, and
yeah, it is a difficult transition. I think a little bit of humility in the moment is helpful. Realizing that you know a lot and you've got a PhD and you've been trained, but at the same time, you know, research technicians or people in the program also have a lot of experience. And so just taking the time to sit with them, to talk with them, communicate with them, kind of get a feel for how the program goes, you know, before making a lot of major adjustments. And then as you make those adjustments, you know, making sure it's a team conversation, you know, so we'll do that a lot. You know, we'll sit down as a group and just say, okay, here's a new idea or a new technology that I heard about. Let's talk about what will happen if we implement it, you know, and there's pros and there's cons, and we talk about it, and usually come to a consensus as a group. Yeah, let's give this a try, or yeah, maybe that's not going to work for us. But I think as I've involved some of those long-term technicians and kind of talked to them about that, it's given me also the ability for the days that I've had to come in and say, I know you guys might not be excited about this, but this is a place I want to go. Let's give it a try. They've been more willing to jump on board because they know if after a year it doesn't work, they can come back to me and we can have that conversation again. And, you know, they know that I'll adjust to their needs as well.
And they'll have ownership in the program too. I think that's the important point, is that hopefully everyone in the program has some type of ownership, grad students, even undergrads, but grad students for sure, technicians for sure, have kind of see the benefit of what they're doing and why they're doing it. And feel free to come up with ideas and you know, and to encourage that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think as the people who work for you feel that ownership and value with what they're doing, it's just a lot better than it's like, I'm the boss and you guys just do what I tell you to do. You know, it's a difficult work environment to be in. Whereas, if they feel value and know that their contribution is improving the program, definitely life's better.
All right, well, next question. Can you describe the criteria used to evaluate an academic plant breeder for tenure, and what changes occur once tenure is achieved?
Do you want
Well, we can maybe start with,
it's fine.
Is tenure for an academic plant breeder different than other academic positions? Or is it the same?
From my perspective, I think it's very similar in that coming in, you know what you need to do, which is write papers and get grants and do a good job teaching. So that's fairly universal. And then for plant breeders, you have to add on evaluating for tenure is tricky because most people haven't had the opportunity to release too many varieties, or even if you have, it's hard to tell the impact of those varieties that you have released. I mean, maybe you can get some impact, but usually it's just a small amount of time, 5 years to actually release, have the seed available to farmers and see how much is grown. Judging that impact is hard, but I think just, you know, seeing that they are working well with other plant breeders in their community, like for us, barley and quinoa breeders and genomicists, that, you know, you're active within that community, I think is important. And you have support and you're submitting grants or doing projects with other breeders, and you are, at least in our case with cereals, you are releasing varieties that make sense and will, you know, have gone through our respective grain commission or whatever commission it is, and they're happy, pleased with them. So.
I think the plant breeders have that little added, you know, kind of stakeholder collaboration part. Whereas if you're just a research scientist, you know, it's more about getting grants, getting publications, and just really about, the numbers and the impact of your science on the scientific community. Plant breeding is more about relationships and collaborations with other groups, collaborations with your stakeholders. Everybody's going to be evaluated still by, publications and grants. You're in a university system, and that's how they do evaluations, but it's not to downplay, the credit you would still get for releasing a variety. So I still get equal credit for releasing a variety as I do for publishing a paper. I mean, it's still output of my program.
Yeah.
So every university is going to look at that differently. I think, Washington State University does a good job of giving the plant breeders credit for their varieties released and the impact of those varieties as much as they do, the research side of it, as far as publications and stuff go.
And what about the second part of that question? What changes occur once you have tenure?
For me, nothing.
Yes.
I mean, it's, you know what I mean? And that's just always been my view of my career. I come into work, I work my hardest, I try and be the best colleague and collaborator that I can, the best mentor to my students. But yet I've found a nice balance, right? I've got a family at home, and I'm not here on weekends, and I'm not here on the evenings as much, as I can. And I've just always found that balance where I've said, like, if I can't get done what needs to be done during the work week, I doubt coming in on weekends and, how much more really is that going to make me successful? So I've just always looked at it as I show up, I do my job. And once tenure was granted, great, tenure was granted, but I'm still doing the same thing. I'm still grad students, research, varieties, you know what I mean? So nothing really changed. But again, I think part of that was how I came in with my mentality. As I just took it as I'm going to do the best I can with the time I have. And I'm just going to keep doing that, right? It's not going to change when I get promoted to professor, right? It's just come in, I do my job, and I do it the best I can. So I've been able to find that balance, and I think that's why I say nothing's really changed. I just see it again doing the same thing as I go, kind of from the metrics side of things.
And that's something we have in common too. I like that balance, and I think it's important not just to have it as an assistant professor, but as a grad student and a postdoc. I would come in every day when I was a grad student after driving an hour, I'd be here by 6 a.m., but I'd leave every day at 3, no matter what, so I could go home and be with my kids. That was it. And luckily my advisor was fine with that, But yeah, it's that balance is really important. And so everything you said, I totally agree. Nothing has really changed. I can't think of it. I mean, the only thing maybe is, and it's a little off topic, but probably the only thing that's really changed is that now we have been here long and we see new faculty come in, and we can provide mentorship for them and talk them through the more difficult times and things like that. But that's.
So you're on the other side now.
Yeah.
I mean, you definitely take on kind of a more seniority, leadership, mentoring role with some of the junior faculty that come in. Because, and part of that is you want them to be successful as well. So, I guess maybe that is one thing that's changed a little bit is kind of the first, as I was getting towards tenure, it was very centric focused. What does my program need to do to get me there? And then once I got tenure, maybe my change was I started then looking at some of the other junior faculty that came in and said, here's a project, or here's access to my breeding program, and so I invited some of them to come in and say, I've got thousands of plots. If you want to take some measurements or do some sort of study on those that could be helpful to your program, go ahead and do that. So I've had people that have come in, they take biomass readings, or they'll do, they'll fly their drones over it to develop new sensors or whatever it is, where it takes nothing from me, right? They're out there already, but it gives them that benefit of, so yeah, I think that probably is what has changed the most is, you stop looking kind of at what I need to do to be successful to how do I help other people be successful.
So what I'm taking out of that is tenure doesn't have to be, or getting tenure doesn't have to be that nightmare that some people say it is, where you're working to your absolute max to get it. You can have a sustainable lifestyle and get tenure. Is that
I think so. I mean, like I said, that's how I've done it, and that's how I've seen a lot of other people who have been successful doing it is finding the balance. I mean, you can stress out about it. You can work hard, you can work weekends, whatever it is, but I don't know that I've ever seen them be any more successful than the people who, again, focus on what they need to do, and have that good, steady progress, going forward. I mean, I think both of them have been successful. I've just always thought the more focused approach is a lot easier on the person than stressing out about it constantly.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense, because if you're trying to be incredibly productive just to get tenure, and it's not sustainable, then eventually your production is going to go down, which you don't want.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or you might have a breakdown of some type or another, and that nobody wants that either.
No.
I mean, and do you see that? For me, it helped actually having a backup plan. So if I didn't get tenure, I had a plan B and a plan C.
And you were comfortable with those, and so it takes the pressure off of plan A.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's the most hopeful thing I've ever heard about the tenure process.
Oh, good.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah, it always sounded like a hazing or something.
Yeah.
But,
I don't know. Yeah, I've never, like I say, the tenure process wasn't as bad as everybody. But, again, I think, I've even looked back at this, like, the prelims. Again, if you work hard and you study for your prelims, you go in scared to death. But most people, when they look back on it, are like, okay, but it wasn't that bad. You know what I mean? I think we make a lot up into it. But again, that's if you go in prepared and have done your part. The times I see people fail at prelims is when they really haven't done their part. And so I kind of see that again with the tenure process is very similar. You know what your expectations are, and you work towards those in a very controlled fashion. If you aren't doing your part, then it starts getting worried and stressful. But the people who, are prepared, that usually is a pretty easy process and seamless. And I think a lot of times the people who struggle with it more are the more vocal ones than the people who, have gone through that process a little easier. They don't talk about it a lot. Whereas the people who are struggling a little more with it seem to talk a lot more about it. So you're probably, hearing the horror stories from the few percent of people who have struggled with that process, not the majority of people who have been successful at getting tenure.
That makes sense.
I would also say if you've had other jobs too, you realize how hard other jobs are. Like I was farming for 7-8 years before this. This job felt, I don't want to say easy, but I always would think back to those years, and this is, I'm very appreciative of what we have here.
The stakes are different with this. Is how I maybe describe that. Like when you're farming, you make the wrong decision.
Oh, yeah.
And the stakes are a lot higher with that, whereas here it's more of a long-term game.
Yeah, we can fail here. We have that luxury to try new things, and that's part of our job in a way. But we have that luxury to fail, and the more we do it, not that we want to fail, but if we do it, that means maybe farmers don't have to fail, or whoever our stakeholders are. We can share what we learn. Working with quinoa, it's become really clear. You get used to it.
Yeah, definitely share the knowledge of what not to do.
Exactly. We got really good at that first few years.
Yeah. Well, we've entered the Q&A portion, but we haven't had any questions submitted, so we'll continue on with the questions we have that were given ahead of time.
You might have one, yeah.
Oh, we just had one. Can you suggest ways in which a graduate student can begin demonstrating collaborative skills? Can this be within department?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of opportunities for collaboration. You know, I think it's whether it's within the department. We have a lot of collaborations outside of the department as well. You know, and again, it's going to be hard to speak to any one individual, right? But you know, having the conversations with your advisor and just telling them, hey, you know, I want to look for opportunities. What are some opportunities? Or you yourself thinking about your research. You know, okay, I'm looking at this, and I know a certain other person has this piece of equipment or a technology or a new, you know, whatever. And maybe, you know, and that, again, that critical thinking piece, how could I incorporate that into my project? And just talking with your advisor about it and saying, hey, you know, this is something I've been interested in. Would you mind, you know, helping me foster that collaboration? And then I think also just within graduate students, I mean, I know a lot of my graduate students get together with other students in the department, and they'll just talk about research and their projects. And, you know, eventually somebody will be like, oh, that's an interesting way how to analyze data. Could you help me, you know, maybe see if that would be a good analysis for my project? And so they just kind of do little collaborations off to the side. Again, you could demonstrate like, hey, yeah, I knew this statistical approach, and I was able to help 4 other graduate students apply it to their work. Or, you know, even little things like that, I think are important. You know, a lot of times I think going into job interviews, you think you've had to have won the Nobel Prize, right, to talk about it. But no, talk about even the little things that you do. You know, I was able to help this one graduate student, or I was able to do this, you know, even if to you maybe they seem little, to the hiring committee, it's demonstrating that you have those skills.
Yeah, so like Aaron said, first talk to your advisor, get their ideas, get their blessings, and a lot of advisors encourage independent research as well as part of their students' PhD projects. And then it's really important to remember that all the faculty in your department and at your university are really there for you in many ways. So don't be shy about going to talk to them once you figure out what you want to do and anything like that. Go talk to them. My students amaze me at who they go talk to and what they end up doing. It's just phenomenal. Like when I bring them in and I have this in mind for them, 4 years later, they've done just absolutely incredible things that I never envisioned, because they would take the time to go talk to people just in soil science. So same department, we've had really cool collaborations come out of that long term, and going to food science, just whatever their interests are. It's been, I think, going and talking and seeing what sticks. And,
and I think that's one of the best skills you can learn also as a graduate student, is to maybe think outside of the box a little bit and find, you know, how do you find even those collaborations? So, you know, I'll hear students that'll come in and say, oh, you know, I'll ask them, are you going to seminar? Oh, it's you know, they're going to be talking about this or that or whatever, but I'm a plant breeder. I don't need to go listen to a water quality talk, or, you know, whatever it is. And I really get disappointed with that kind of attitude, because some of the best research that I've engaged in is when I've been sitting in a talk that has been, you know, a soil microbiologist. And I was sitting there listening to what they were doing, and I was like, oh, I think I can help out with that project, with some of the germplasm that I had and some of the data they were showing about variety response and soil, you know, microbiome and how varieties were interacting. Since I knew more about the varieties, I could provide insight to them and say, hey, yeah, I think the reason is this variety does this and this variety does that in the field. And we've started some great collaborations out of that. And so being able to go to other seminars, you know, outside of your discipline, read papers that are not in your discipline, you know, just go to like, you know, the science table of contents and just see what's being published in science, you know, where are these like major breakthroughs, and start learning about those. Because then that leads right into the collaboration opportunities. Like I say, I think, you know, Kevin would probably agree that as you learn what other people are doing, you do start bridging, you know, your discipline in with theirs.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years is a long time for a PhD student to work with one faculty, as you can attest to, right, Nicola? So it is good to, yeah. I mean, I think that just ties into those job skills that people look forward to, that we both talked about with the first question, is having that breadth of knowledge. Yeah.
Well, folks, we've hit the time limit.
Oh.
We're at 45 minutes. So I want to thank y'all, Dr. Kevin, Dr. Aaron, for participating with us.
Sure.
And for the audience members, I'd like to let y'all know that we will have one more webinar that will be next Tuesday on April 30th at 1 p.m. Central Time. So thanks for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.